So let's get started. So we try and do these once a quarter. I think we missed a quarter somewhere along the way. But we've had a lot going on this year, and we thought we'd review some of that work. So for those who might not have been with us for a while, we have 5 initiatives, and of course the oldest, most mature is the KCS Success and Evolution, and there are 2 parts to that. One is the KCS version 6, which we'll talk just a little bit about, and then the other is some work we've been doing on success and actually sustaining KCS benefits over time. That proves to be a challenge. Intelligent swarming, which is the idea of moving from a streaming model or an escalation model to a swarming or network or collaboration model. And we'll talk a little bit about that. Communities and social networks, we've had an update. We had a team meeting on that, so we'll do a quick update on that. The Customer Success Initiative, which is one of the newer of the initiatives we have underway. And a part of that is the predictive customer engagement, which I've included quite a few slides about because I think it's one of the most interesting things we're working on. And then the Leadership for Service Excellence, Leadership Framework for Service Excellence, which one of our favorite provocative assertions is the hierarchy has outlived its usefulness, and if organizations thought of themselves as a network structure rather than a hierarchy, all kinds of good things happen. And of course, swarming, intelligent swarming, is one of the steps on the way to becoming a networked organization. We won't talk much about that on this call, but we are doing our executive summit in a few weeks, and that's the group, the executives of the member companies, where we actually progress the thinking on that model. So, some topics. We'll talk about the team meetings we've done this year. There's a couple on KCS, as well as a number of phone calls to get KCS version 6 out the door. And that's actually proved to be quite a domino effect. Every time we touch something with the KCS methodology, we find 3 more things that should be updated. And that actually is continuing. So maybe by the end of the year, we'll have 90% of the KCS materials up to the V6 vocabulary and standard. But numerous team meetings on that. We did a team meeting on the strategy for a global support experience, or for a consistent global support experience, in March. Social communities and knowledge, an update on that in May. Intelligence swarming team meeting was in June. The predictive customer engagement was August. And we just held, just last week, I think it was, the adoption, KCS version 6 adoption and enablers. We're just talking about the KCS verified and aligned programs for V6. We'll give you a quick update on the certification programs and then talk about upcoming events and topics. We also had a number of web sessions. So we typically do a team meeting, which is a face-to-face, 2.5 days usually, hosted by a member company. We try and alternate East Coast, West Coast, and Europe for those. And that's what I just talked about. Then we also do, on the other months, we do web sessions on more specific topics. And so we've had a number of those this year. The one to taxonomy or not to taxonomy is poking at the question of and challenges of having classification models or taxonomy models that are manually done versus using technology and some of the emerging autonomic or learning systems that are coming out to do the classification of content without having to do it manually. So that's a really interesting one. And then there's a lot of interest in the Evolve Loop as companies are maturing on their KCS journey, really looking to maximize the leverage or the benefits they're getting. That really requires some good Evolve Loop practices. So we've been focusing on that a bit through the past year, and we'll continue. All the notes from the meetings and web sessions are available on the wiki. If you don't know how to get to the wiki, you could send Kelly a chat right now and she'll reply, or send us an email. The wiki is there's a ton of great stuff in the wiki from years and years of meetings and conversations and member presentations, and if you know our vocabulary, the search is pretty good. We seem to have this problem with findability from time to time. It's organized by meetings. So KCS V6, what's new? So if you haven't heard, V6 was announced at our members summit some months ago, and I think the biggest change is making it generic, is talking about it from a principle and core concepts point of view rather than from the techniques point of view. And that's been driven by Apollo and Salesforce.com and some others who are doing KCS in non-support, technical support environments. The Apollo group uses it in their legal community and in their financial aid for students and enrollment and places that don't have cases or incidents. And getting great benefit. And so we're describing KCS in more generic terms. That has proved to be a massive undertaking because so many of our examples in KCS V5, and actually the whole legacy of KCS, is all derived from our experience with our members in high-tech customer support. And so a lot of the examples in the practices guide are still very support-oriented. So this is probably an ongoing effort over the next couple of years as we learn more about organizations that are doing it without a case. One of the things kind of go in cycles, and when we first started talking about KCS some 20 plus years ago, we talked about it from a principles point of view and found that people really struggled to interpret a principle into some practices and techniques. So then we started writing the practices guide around version 3 from a pretty pragmatic or practical point of view, pretty prescriptive. Then we found people took it too seriously or too literally, as if that's the only way to do KCS. And in fact, there are many, many ways to implement KCS. So we've come back around to describing the principles and core concepts. So there is now a document in the library called KCS Principles and Core Concepts. And our hope is that these 4 principles, trust, abundance, demand-driven, and create value, will become sort of an acid test. If you're discussing something in your organization as to how to approach a certain challenge you have with adopting KCS, these 4 things, are we designing this from a point of view of trust? Do we trust the employees to make good judgment? Are we designing this process or this change to the content standard based on abundance? The more we share, the more we learn, or are we basing it on scarcity, which is the kind of the traditional model? Are we thinking about things from a demand-driven point of view, that is, respond to demand? This is what makes it autonomic, makes it align with autonomic systems and double-loop learning, and also is one of the reasons it's so efficient is because it is demand-driven. It's a sense and respond system. And so testing, are we really responding to demand and experience in what we're proposing? And then the create value is, if people really understand the bigger picture, why they're doing KCS, why they're being asked to do KCS, they're more likely to do the solve loop every day with a higher level of quality and more often, and that creates more value in the evolve loop. And so really reinforcing this idea, you can't just tell people what to do, you have to tell them why. And if they understand why, they'll make good decisions on achieving those goals, especially if they understand what's in it for them. And they're likely to create more value in their day-to-day work if they understand how it fits in the bigger picture. So those are the 4 kind of fundamental, deep principles on which KCS is based, and hopefully make for a good test of proposals and things that because there are a lot of details you have to, and decisions you have to make in adopting and sustaining KCS. So we hope those are helpful. A few other things at V6, we've added more flexibility to the article states, made 3 separate independent attributes which allow some of our members who are saying they'd really like to make things that are not yet validated visible to customers because the customers can help. And in the old model, you really couldn't do that. And then also, as we look at organizations like Apollo and Salesforce.com and Intel who are using KCS in their HR communities, there's some policies that really need a governance model. And so governance is a flag on an article that overrides the licensing model and says only the person who owns this HR policy can approve this article or can modify or create in the first place. So it's a little more, it adds a little bit of complexity, but it also adds a tremendous amount of flexibility in terms of the article life cycle and who can see what when. We've updated the leadership model with a lot more accountability and talking about assessing communication effectiveness and holding leadership accountable to deliver on the what's in it for me, especially for the knowledge worker. And then measures, we've had measures for SQI, the AQI, Article Quality Index for as long as I can remember, but we've also added the process integration indicators, which are how well are we doing the solve loop of all the opportunities we have to contribute to the knowledge base, which is linking, modifying, or if it doesn't exist, creating articles. How often do we, based on a sampling technique? So, and then some additional measures for leadership as well. So the indicators of health for each of the evolved loop practices, which I think will help with organizations' ability to sustain the KCS benefits over time. That's the KCS V6. We'll talk a little bit later about the certification programs and their status. We had a question from one of the members about how do you create a consistent global customer experience? And there's a lot of interest in this. And so we hosted a team meeting and had a number of companies participate and created a list of headaches, which is kind of fun. Those are on the wiki if you want to see what they are. But really, I think where we landed in talking about it was that there's a whole bunch of tools and techniques that we've talked about over the last 10 years, like journey mapping and the value models and the strategic framework, that really help organize a global strategy to drive a consistent customer experience. The one thing that came up, at least for me, in this conversation was how few companies actually have a brand promise that everybody knows. So a lot of companies have a compelling purpose, the tagline. They have values about how they're going to behave and treat each other and treat their customers. They often have a mission statement, and but very few have a brand promise, which I think is critical if you're going to really work on your customer experience. The brand promise are the attributes that you'd like your customers to say about you to other people. So they're trustworthy, they're knowledgeable, they're available, they're fun to deal with, they're reliable, those kind of attributes. And if you don't have a brand promise, then the likelihood people are actually working towards reinforcing a brand promise and every interaction with the customer is pretty small. If you do have a brand promise, it can really be the basis for understanding and evaluating things like journey mapping and the strategic framework and things like that. So we did an exercise at a member summit 2 or 3 years ago about the brand promise, and we might dig that out because it was pretty good at helping people think through what is a brand promise and how do we build one, and then why is that important? Customer Success Manager has come up a couple of times in a number of different contexts, and it came up in this area of a consistent global experience. And there's quite a diversity in the members in terms of where the Customer Success Manager reports and what their role is, and what their goals are, how they're measured. So if they're measured on cross-sell and upsell, that's a very different kind of approach to this role than if they're measured on retention and growth of functions used. So some interesting conversation. I think that will continue over the coming year in terms of getting some clarity on Customer Success Manager's role and where they best fit. This is a model from the Customer Success Initiative. The infinity loop here is the customer touchpoint model that we use. We've adopted from Esteban Kolsky, who's an industry consultant. And so this is the get loop, and this is the use loop. Or is it the buy and the use? I can't remember. Anyway, it's the selling and the using, supporting loops, and then all the things you do around that. And what we found in this conversation about a consistent global experience is that these same methods and same model really applies to evaluating and improving your global support experience. But again, it's all based on having a brand promise, because that's the That's the criteria against which you assess the impact of the customer experience and analyze and prioritize improvements and measure the impact of those improvements. So another initiative that we've had going for a couple of years, probably I want to say it's been like 3 or 4, which means it's probably 6 or 8, is the social communities and knowledge. And we had a meeting at Salesforce that has Salesforce.com has a pretty amazing social media monitoring center, and it's pretty integrated into their whole business at Salesforce. So that was a great place to host the meeting. The model that we've developed over the years of past conversation is this idea of monitor, listen, and learn, let social support social, and improve, inform, and influence. And so it's a great, paying attention to social media channels and online communities is a great way to learn a lot about what your customers are talking about, what they like, what they don't like. The let social support social is the idea that if you really have to be careful about the role support organization plays or anyone in the company plays within a community or the social networks. Because if you're very, very active as the vendor or as the provider of a service in the community, you will mute the voices of those who would be active, who are often your evangelists and power users within the community. So it's really a delicate balance to do enough to nurture and support a community, but not disrupt the nature of the conversation, the flow, and the ability of those who can contribute to enable them to contribute. So, and also, if you're too active as a vendor, you can't scale. So let social support social says create an environment and nurture the environment such that it's self-sufficient. Because that's scalable. Let the power users in the community be the moderators of the community discussions in their area of expertise. And then improve, inform, influence. There's a lot more detail on these in the wiki. So the opportunity to improve processes, policies, products, feature functionality, all those things, as well as to use social media to inform customers of things that they would value. And influence. You have to be careful not to use these channels as marketing. They really have to serve the interest of the community, not the interest of your company. Once they are self-serving from a company point of view, the community will either ban you or go somewhere else. So communities are really about the community members, not about the vendor. But there's a lot you can learn, and there are some things you can do to influence them. We have done a lot of work on this social engagement journey map or matrix. It's essentially a maturity model. We'll go take a quick look at it because I think it has, every time we have a meeting on this, we're looking to update this matrix. And there's a lot of detail in it, so I'm not going to go through the detail, but to give you a sense of what's in here, there's down the side is strategy, customer engagement, employee engagement, people profile management, crisis management, metrics, and technology. And then across the top, so those are the focus areas you have to pay attention to, and across the top are the stages of maturity, from traditional, which really ignores social media and communities, all the way to fully integrated, where it's part of your DNA. And then for each of those focus areas, there's some thoughts on sort of the criteria or indicators of where you might be. It's a lot of detail, but I think it's helpful in providing assessment of where you are with respect to each of those focus areas. You might be in different stages for each focus area, by the way. There's not. You could be at different places. And then what's next? So if you're at stage 2 with respect to your employee engagement, there's a list. The things that are in the next cell would tell you what things you might focus on next in terms of your evolution. So we hope that's a useful tool. Oh, go ahead.
And that's available on our website. I've linked to it in the chat. So.
Oh, good. Thank you. So we had a pretty diverse group at this meeting, sharing their experiences. We talked here again about the customer success manager's role. I think Salesforce is perhaps one of the most mature in this area with their customer success manager program. It's very much a part of how they run their business. Benefits of a healthy community. Salesforce shared their early warning system, which is a very interesting model around being able to predict, based on people's behavior, patterns of use, and being able to categorize companies and to compare them to similar companies. They're pretty good at predicting retention. And of course, in a SaaS model or software as a service model, retention is everything. Convergence of the support knowledge base with, I didn't put MathWorks on there as contributing, but we had an update from our friends at MathWorks who have actually converged their support knowledge base with their community knowledge base. There is only one knowledge base, and everybody gets to play in it, and they've a fairly simple infrastructure, and they're getting some tremendous benefit by essentially looking at that as a single thing. There's a case study on our website about that. And then Odell, Monique shared with us the social knowledge domain expert, which is taking the knowledge domain expert, which we've defined in KCS in terms of the role in the evolved loop, and really having them expand their scope to include social networks and online communities as a source of patterns and trends and opportunities. So maybe I'll stop there just for a minute, see if there are any questions. And again, there's lots more detail on each one of these initiatives in the wiki for those of you who are members. So, doesn't look like there's any questions. Kelly's put a few links in the chat window there. Okay, another initiative is intelligence swarming, and if you're not familiar with intelligence swarming, this is moving from the old model of streaming, level 1, level 2, level 3, and an escalation-based process to a model of, which is very linear, production line kind of approach to support, to a model of swarming, which is a collaboration-based process. And the goal is to get the person most likely able to fix the issue to work on it on the first touch. So lots of implications here in terms of people profiles. We have to know a lot about our customers and who they are and what they know, the environment in which they work. And we have to know a lot about our employees and our partners in terms of who they are, what they know, and what environments they're familiar with. Because it's the profiles that make intelligence swarming intelligent. So our ability to, if we can get the issue to the person most likely to fix it on the first touch, then the need for help for that person is very small. But in the case they do need help, then they can access the other people who are relevant to that situation, and they hold the issue until it's closed, the case or the incident, which really promotes a whole new level of learning in this model. And Steve Young, who is on our board of directors and long time participant with the consortium, is, in my mind, the father of intelligence swarming, and he talks about doing it from the point of view of skills development and developing customer sensitivity or business acumen, really understanding how products are used in the customer environment rather than just how the products work from a design point of view. But skills development was his primary goal in pursuing this model, and then there are lots of other side benefits that we've seen. So we continue to discuss this. So what's different? A few of the tenets, I talked about the first one. I talked about the second one. The analyst can find the best available person to help based on profiles. Support analysts can see the work that's relevant to them. So in the ideal intelligence swarming world, there are no more queues of work, people's view of work is relevant to their profile. So my view of work would be different than Kelly's view of work because we have different skills and different interests. You have to include interests in people's profiles, by the way. Here again, just like with KCS, where we bump up against the question of how do you measure people's contribution in a highly collaborative environment, and I would say that's still pretty much a frontier. In that we're still discovering a lot about how to do that, because it cannot be time-based or activity-based. It has to be value-based. And what's emerging is that it's really a reputation model. It's a function of the people who realize the value, provide feedback, and or their patterns over time reflect their realization of value. And that's what creates people's assessment of contribution. So the dream is that we remove managers from the role of being judges and assessors of contribution, and that the system, inherent in the design of the system, as a byproduct of the interactions of the people doing the work, their reputation actually reflects the value they're creating, which becomes the primary source for contribution assessment. And managers really become coaches and the handlers of exceptions, not judges, and not the owners of teams. When managers feel they own a team, collaboration is inhibited. So really interesting management challenges, actually creating leaders rather than managers. So very exciting. We have intelligence swarming has been on our radar for about probably 14 years now. We've been dreaming about it, talking about it from a conceptual point of view. Wouldn't it be great if? It's been in the last 5 to 6 years we've actually had a handful of our members doing intelligence swarming, and they've done it in very different ways. Some with lots of technology and some totally manually. Smaller teams that do it manually. It's not very scalable manually if it's a big team. But we are now gaining actual operational experience and finding out what the benefits are and what works and what doesn't work, and so we will continue to have team meetings on this. I think it's, for moderate to high complex environments, I think intelligence swarming is the next big thing for support organizations. It really enables us to rethink and optimize how we align people with work. And it's really good at solving new. If we get really good at solving known through self-service or root cause analysis and corrective action, then hopefully what's left is mostly new, and how we align people with the work in that environment that's the sweet spot for intelligence swarming. So here's some of the companies that are doing it. BMC has also had one that they weren't at this meeting, but we had some great contribution from these folks. We continue to talk about people profiles. Those get very, very complicated very, very fast. The role of the knowledge worker. There's some changes in mindset that have to happen. For example, I think we've, to some extent, conditioned people to feel like if they need help, it's a failure. That they'll do all kinds of things sometimes to try and solve a problem, when in fact, if they'd asked for help 2 hours ago, it would have been solved in 10 minutes. And I think our individualistic approach to assessing people's contribution has really promoted that kind of an attitude, which has to change when you move to an intelligence swarming model. So you want people to collaborate. Now, the other side of the coin is you don't want them to collaborate too early. So there's a coaching opportunity here in terms of helping people exercise good judgment on when they've done enough due diligence on a problem to know enough about it to go get help, versus not really doing the right, enough due diligence and asking for help too early. So you can ask for help too early, you can ask for help too late. We really want people to ask for help when it's just right. And that takes a little bit of a mindset shift and some coaching opportunities, I think. Even bigger than the change for the knowledge worker is the change for the managers. This is becoming a reoccurring theme. The first and second line managers really have to be let go of their management, their command and control, their role as a judge, their sense of ownership of a team, and really become coaches and facilitators of the network. And they are the ones who handle exceptions, but they also need to create the environment where collaboration happens at the right point in time with the right people on the right issues. So here again, just like with KCS, we're finding that the managers, there are a number of things we need to do to help them be successful in this new environment. And I suspect, well, I fully expect that will continue to be a focus of our work over the next 12 to 18 months. So, predictive customer engagement. Well, maybe I'll stop. Any questions on intelligence forming? I do think it is a very exciting proposition. The benefits we're seeing are exceeding, in all cases, exceeding our expectations. The employees love it, the customers love it. It's a more efficient way to get work done. It promotes creativity and innovation. It promotes tremendous learning. So we're doing a workshop in a few weeks in London. If any of you have, well, if any of you are going to be in London or have peers over there that you think would benefit from a one-day intelligence forming workshop, I think there are a couple seats still available. That's on our event page. Okay, so the next very exciting thing we're working on is this idea of the predictive customer engagement model. And the initial question that was posed, and this came out of one of our executive summits from Matt Siemens at PTC and Jim Burrows from PTC, was at the time was a rather provocative question. How can we provide information that we have that customers would value but don't know to ask us for? And I think the real trick here is relevance, is delivering information that's highly relevant. Because quite often the first thing we think of, at least the first thing I think of with this is, what Amazon does. Because you bought some books in the past, you might be interested in these books. And my wife teaches kindergarten, and I often buy books for her, Richard Scarry's Busy Harbor. And I now get recommendations from Amazon about kids' books that really have no relevance to me. So that's a pretty unsophisticated model, and it's really not information I value. So the trick here is for them to really get to know me, if I let them, so that they can give me things that are really relevant. So we've done a lot of work on this over the last 2 years, and we're in that phase of, oh my gosh, this is really complicated and hard. It started off with great excitement about we're going to go do this, and now we're in that valley of complexity in terms of understanding all of this. So some of the companies very active and that were with us, PTC and EMC, both have a lot going on in this area. Some discussion topics, where's the line of creepiness? The more we know about people or customers and our ability to actually be predictive and or proactive and can feel rather creepy. So understanding that line of creepiness, we had a great conversation around that. Customer engagement and adoption, just like with the conversations we've had about the co-creation of value and services and the fact that customers have to be part of that design process, and because they're part of the realization of value process in a service, we're seeing a similar theme here where we're giving customers some interesting information that we think they should act on, but they don't take action. And then these are things that would be good for them to do. So providing them with enough evidence and helping them feel confident that this action is actually worthwhile and in their best interest is proving to be a challenge. And I think here again, because this is a co-creation factor, what we call the co-creation of value factor, if customers aren't part of designing these processes, the likelihood we get it right when they have to do things is pretty small. And so customer presence, I think, is huge. It's hugely important in terms of designing these predictive capabilities so that they really are relevant and interesting, and we can provide the appropriate level of evidence to a customer that they should take action. If they aren't part of that design process, the likelihood we get it right is pretty small. So I've been dreaming about a customer presence index that would be an assessment for a company in terms of the design of their services and processes and policies that measures the presence of customers in that process. So I think we're seeing the same dynamic here with the predictive customer engagement model. Empowering the individual, so we've done a lot of work with over the last year or two with Doc Searles and his VRM, the vendor relationship management effort, which is really all about empowering us as individuals with respect to how companies use information that they learn about us as a result of our interactions. And that very much comes into play here in terms of this predictive customer engagement model, and how I think part of how we address the creepiness factor is by empowering the individual, giving them control over preferences and the criteria for the things they're interested in. Now, that's easy to say and very difficult to do because it gets very, very complicated very, very fast. But there's some really interesting work going on in a couple of different areas around this. We had a great discussion about what does support look like when 80% of the work is proactive. So we know that organizations today struggle with the shift from traditional transaction-based measures. How many cases did you close? What's your average time to close? What's your backlog? All those rather boring, uninteresting, traditional measures that tell you nothing about the health of the support organization. Those are still at the conversation at the C-level. So when we talk about a shift in thinking for measures, KCS and self-service introduces shift 1. Predictive customer engagement introduces shift 2. To the best of my knowledge, the C-level has yet to make shift 1. And so now we're talking about yet another shift in how we think about success and measuring health and value of the organization. And with predictive customer engagement, it changes yet again. So that's an interesting, I'm hoping we might talk about that at the Executive Summit in a few weeks, is we absolutely have to do some things to help C-level executives who are not part of the support community understand the value and the health of the support organization in ways that have nothing to do with cases or incidents. And this ties with the next one, linking proactive support to business outcomes, and really being able to tell that story about the value and health of our customer interactions and the value those are creating. And then interesting conversation around when do we do proactive support? What's the criteria? Because it's not necessarily the right thing to do for all types of business or all types of services, and who decides. And some interesting turf wars that might emerge there between marketing, product management, and the customer advocate or customer support organization. So some great challenges, some interesting topics and great challenges we're talking about. So a little bit more about this, because I do think this is this and intelligence forming, I think, are the two big ideas that we're currently working on. So in order to do this, it's largely data-driven. So we're talking about big data and things like some new vocabulary that's emerging around data lakes and digital exhaust, and just some really interesting terms that are emerging around this whole big data concept. But that is at the heart of what enables a predictive customer engagement model. We have to know a lot about the customer, a lot about us, a lot about past work, a lot about what they have installed, what their business model is. So we've identified, in rather loose terms, these 5 key data assets. So we need to know a lot about people. That's employees, customers, partners, industry consultants, right? So it's not just not just people in the company. So we need to know a lot about knowledge articles that have been used and who's used them, because those are interesting patterns and trends. We need to know a lot about the customer entity. Who are they? What business are they in? What are their goals? What do they have installed of our offerings? How is it configured? A huge amount of information, very complex. What work or tasks have we been engaged with them in the past? So could be professional services, it could be cases or incidents that have been opened in the last 3 or 4 months that are interesting, that might be linked to knowledge articles that would tell us something about where they are and what they're doing. And then the vendor offerings, this is our portfolio of offerings, so information about our products in terms of how they're performing. Each one of these data assets gets extremely complicated as you get in. You don't have to go too many layers deep into the thinking about what they are and how they work. So the model, we have this idea of events, and events are generated by people, by devices, or the environment. And of course, the Internet of Things, IoT, is a big buzzword right now in the industry. So events happen as a result of people's actions, things that happen on systems, or things that are happening in the environment. And those go through what we call the listening post. And this matrix is where are they on the customer touchpoint journey. So down the left side is where they are on the customer lifecycle journey. And across the bottom is what is the mode of interaction? Is it coming through a social media channel? Is it coming through community? Is it coming through a case? Is it a visit to a sales website? All of those things. Is it person to person? So knowing where they are in the life cycle and knowing how the event is coming in is interesting information. And then there's this black box where we have our data assets and a bunch of analysis and rules and some discovery and then some output. We're still playing with this word, proactive output, or a recommendation that goes back through this same matrix of being sensitive to where they are in the life cycle and what mode of interaction they're going through goes back to the source of the event. So this is the conceptual model that we've been working on and working out the details of what all this is. So this black box is interesting. I don't know if this is really an architecture or a concept, but these are some thoughts, how we've organized our discussion around what's inside that black box. So 4 layers. There's the data, often now referred to as the data lake. There's our ability to make associations between the data. So this person who's associated with this customer and associated with these 3 incidents over the last 3 months that are associated with this knowledge article that's associated with this product, being able to make those associations is what will enable us to make meaningful, relevant recommendations. So the next layer up is the analysis and rules, which generate a recommendation. And then how do we present that, the presentation layer? And so we've got different audiences we have to think about. There's many, this is just, for example, different audiences that want to see information in different ways. Some of it may be executable, which is what this is meant to mean. So some of these recommendations might actually be a script or an executable object that is actually handled by a machine, some action taken by a machine, by a computer, or it might be something to a person. And so we went, one more, let's see. So because we love the double loop process, we talk about the event loop, which is this model, sorry. This is the event loop, which is essentially the A loop in a double loop model. And then the evolve loop or the improve loop for this, in this context, is analyzing your asset quality, the analyst effectiveness, the rules effectiveness, engagement, which means our customers actually taking action on it. What's the impact? How good is our event detection effectiveness? Because an awful lot of these events will be generated by systems through the Internet of Things. So we're thinking about this model as a double loop. And then we've talked a bit about the role of the data scientist as part of this. and some of the things they might offer. So any questions or comments? We will have some more meetings on this. So there's a comment here in the chat from Eric about market forces make an interesting analogy for intelligence forming. Invisible hand, trade policies versus free traders. So I think there's, from many different points of view, there are some interesting things around market forces, such as Uber, which is kind of swarming in the taxi world, right? It's taking out the middlemen and the dispatch function and putting a person who needs a ride directly in touch with the person who can offer a ride. So that might be a little bit of a stretch, but okay. KCS adoption, V6 adoption, and enablers. And so Kelly and Melissa facilitated a team meeting just last week talking about this, and I'm going to let Kelly describe that.
This was one of our most exploratory team meetings in a while, it seems. We were really looking for feedback from members around what the scope of the KCS verified, the V6 verified program might look like if we were expanding the scope of KCS to include all kinds of different functions that could use it. What would that mean for the tools? So the verified program's been around for a long time. It started with version 3 a number of years ago. And so now version 5 is up and running well. And so we had a lovely conversation about what version 6 needed to entail, both based on the changes that we made to the methodology in V6, and also how broad were we going to expand the scope of the tool requirements for V6. So the trick.
So Kelly, sorry, yeah. Kelly, just a little context. So we do certification for people, and we do a KCS verified program for technology that supports the full set of KCS practices. And then we do KCS aligned, which is a program for tools or services that support a portion of the KCS practices. So just in case people didn't know, the verified is all about feature functionality to support all 8 practices.
Right. And it turns out we don't know enough about what that might look like for, say, financial services or HR in a really robust way that we could take, tools that were designed specifically for those processes and say, yes, they're verified or not verified. So for version 6, while we do not have the whole program written yet, this is just the beginning, we determined that indeed the V6 verified would be looking at tools that primarily does KCS in a support environment, with or without a case. We had a great conversation mapping a scenario, thanks to Brandon at the Apollo Group, in which you could use these tools to do KCS without linking to an incident. The release date for the V6 verified program is April of 2017, and so this will be continuing work. We'd love to have more conversations about this as it carries forward.
Sorry, did I click that too soon, or were you done?
Nope, go ahead. On to
V6
okay. Verification, yep.
Okay. So V6 certification, which is for people, we have up and running the KCS V6 Bridge exam. So if you're already certified in KCS Practices V5, then you can take the Bridge exam, which is online. Oh gosh, I forget how many questions, 36 questions, maybe 32 questions, and it is only about the things that are incremental in V6. So like the article states, the leadership and communication, changes in some of the indicators for process integration. And there's a study guide. There's information on the library under certification programs for the bridge exam that describes, the topics covered by the exam. So we tried to make that very, low barrier to entry and low cost. And I think it's $85 and it's online. You don't have to. It's not proctored. You don't have to go to a test center or have it video proctored. It will be available for a year. So we're really hoping that anybody who has V5 will get upgraded soon to V6. After September 2017, the bridge exam won't be available. You'll have to take the V6 certification. The V6 practices certification is available and has been updated with questions about V6. The certified internal trainer. So we've had a bit of an informal program for a couple of years now where companies have asked to get trainers certified within their company. They train employees or outsource partners that work on behalf of that company on KCS, and they get to use the Consortium workshop materials. And we've had a number of companies take advantage of that. So we formalized that program. There's now information on the kcsacademy.net website about the internal trainer program. And we offer a license to companies for unlimited use of the Consortium workshop materials so they can run their own training programs. Our goal with that is to help companies become self-sufficient in deploying KCS across multiple divisions and multiple geographies. Then we've had for some time the KCS Certified Trainer. That's an external trainer for consultants and professionals, professional trainers who provide services for a fee, commercial offerings around KCS. And there's a list of, I think we might be up, well, I can't remember how many we have. We have quite a few and growing. Interestingly enough, there are more in Europe now than there are in the US. But those are the programs. We are working on an online training with a built-in exam for knowledge workers that will introduce the concepts of KCS and then test their understanding. And Melissa has been busy working on that, and that I think will be available. Well, I'm not sure when, sometime in the next few months. We did one that we got some member feedback. We did one in partnering with a group called Certification Game, and it was we got a lot of good feedback on that. So now we're we're doing version 2. So certainly should be available before the end of this year. So a few upcoming events. We, of course, have our events page. The big event, the next big event, is the annual member summit, April 3 through 5 in Monterey, California. And on our events page, you can see, oh, that's a little too big, some of the upcoming events. So I mentioned the intelligence swarming workshop we're doing in outside of London. If you have peers in Europe who might benefit from that. We're doing a conference call on translation of workflows, the globalization localization challenge of articles. And in October, actually Rockwell is hosting a meeting in Prague on the predictive customer engagement model, and we're really looking to talk about some of the interesting challenges that European community will have with a model that knows a lot about people, because the works councils in Germany and the Netherlands and other places really put some pretty stringent restrictions on what information you can share about people. Then we'll do oh, that's the same one. And then we have our leadership committee meeting coming up in December. there'll probably be 2 or 3 more conference calls on topics. Sorry, but I'm getting ahead of myself. The Leadership Committee meeting is for sponsor and benefactor level members, and we get together once a year and talk about the work we've done over the past year, and then that committee actually helps us define the scope of future work and prioritize some of the topics that we'll have for 2017. So that will happen in December. A few things we haven't scheduled yet on the calendar, but need to, are a couple of web sessions. We've had some interest in organizational assessment model, and I know Russ at Avaya and some folks at SAP were just talking about this last week. And there's some great work that Devra Strusenberg did a few years ago when she was at Genesis on how to do an organizational assessment. So I think we'll probably do a web session on that in the next month or 2. There's a great story from HP Enterprise on using Six Sigma in an involved loop, which we've been talking with them about. And then reviewing the member practices with KCS licensing and criteria to earn or lose. So it's been some time since we actually looked at what the member practices are with respect to the KCS licensing model, and how people, what's the criteria to earn a license, and what's the criteria by which you remove a license. And so that might be an interesting web session sometime in the next few months. So that's the story. I made it. So
nice work. 8:59. Whew.
Yeah. So we have 1 minute for questions. Okay, that's it. Thanks for joining. So thank you all for joining. And again, we will record we have recorded this. And if you want to send it around to your peers, hopefully it gives you a sense of the work that's been going on over the last 6 months or so. And a lot of this will continue. Most of this is work in progress. And maybe we'll see you at a future team meeting or at the annual member summit in April in Monterey.